why do we have luxury housing? And the answer, we made it illegal to build affordable housing.
Does affordable housing have a branding problem?
Yes. And the issue is this: affordable for whom? The truth is, you have to build housing at all of the price points, right?
We have our first official guest on our podcast. This is crazy. We had my sister first, and then it was you, Koa. And then now we have Sterling Higa, which when I was asked who we want to get on the podcast, Sterling Higa was the first one. And I thought he would be the first one to say no. But you said yes. I don't know why. We need to discuss why. I thought you were a politician, but I've learned you're not, but you run in those circles. I first knew about you. You showed up in my Instagram feed and you were talking about affordable housing, but it wasn't like the typical stuff. I think the clips that I was seeing were different from what I've seen before. And then I ran into you at a Lamb Capital groundbreaking. I didn't talk to you that time, but I was there and I was like, oh, there's that guy that's in my Instagram feed. And then we were at another Lamb Capital groundbreaking, which is affordable housing. And then I had a microphone and a camera because I was tasked to interview people that day. And I was like, I'm going to go talk to Sterling Higa. I don't know if he's on my list. I don't care. I'm going to talk to him. So I went up to you and introduced myself and you're like, you're that realtor. And I was like, oh my gosh, he knows me. And then I was like, what does he know about me? Like, why am I that realtor? So anyway, I went down this rabbit hole, Koa and I both, of who you are a little bit. We tried to keep some stuff at bay so that we would find out right here with you. But anyway, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing.
It's awesome to be in person, to have a conversation. I feel like these longer form conversations are really important.
I agree.
And I'll say I have a Sterling Higa shaped headache right now. Back to the question, why is Sterling Higa here? Why did he agree so fast? They were pressuring me 3 days ago we needed to film another episode. Sterling Higa came up. In my head, I was like, he's a busy guy. I've got at least 3 weeks to prepare for this. And then they said it's Friday. And I'm the biggest procrastinator. I want to puke being on camera. So for you to be here, and the night I had last night, having to get myself ready to talk to you. I've seen you, and that's the thing is, I've seen you out there spitting the good gospel for, our generation, and especially, we hear the message a lot, the affordable housing message, but very rarely is the messenger, peer. And I'm excited to hear. I'm excited about what you're talking about, how you're talking about it, and I want to say appreciate you being here. It's bittersweet for me just because I'm wanted to prepare.
I know.
It'll be more fun this way.
Yeah,
It'll be unscripted.
Right.
I know. I wish we were filming our conversation prior to rolling because it was pretty darn good. So hopefully we can capture some of that too. But I am interested in who you are, how you got here. I got to hear a little bit about you being raised like in town. Like you are a true townie, single mom. You're smart, insightful. You live and breathe the things that you're a part of. You're also highly educated. You went the distance and getting the degrees and whatnot. So if you can just share a little bit about who you are.
That's a very kind introduction. I grew up in town. I was raised by a single mother, grew up in Nu'uanu, very close to downtown. People say town, they mean Kaimuki, Kalihi. No, I grew up like downtown.
Yep.
I went to public school, Royal Elementary, Kawananakoa Middle, Roosevelt High School, and was not the best high school student. So I applied to one college, Honolulu Community College, because my mom told me I could either go to college or pay rent, and I didn't think I could afford rent. So I was working as a dishwasher, going to Honolulu Community College, and I fell into the local slam poetry community. And for about 6 years, did all sorts of slam poetry, worked with an organization called You Speaks Hawaii. We taught performing arts, creative writing to high school students. I really loved it. I went off to Harvard to get a master's degree in education, thinking I would continue in arts education. It didn't work out. Came back to Hawaii, ended up teaching performing arts in a middle school for a couple of years, and then was hired to coach debate and teach public speaking at HPU. So was at Hawaii Pacific University for about 4.5 years before I was asked to co-found Housing Hawaii's Future. the organization is about getting young people educated, engaged in this issue of affordable housing. Our whole theory is millennials, Gen Z are being affected by the cost of housing, many of them feeling like they have to leave Hawaii, but their voices are often not represented. So, a big part of what I've been doing for the last 3.5 years is in the conversations that I'm invited to, offering the perspective of young people, talking with them, equipping them with the skills they need to get involved, whether that's advocacy or just having conversations with their family, feeling like they have a voice.
I mentioned earlier, I see you a lot. First time I, heard your name, you did a affordable housing seminar. I think it was sent out to realtor groups. I had a few friends go. I was supposed to go. I didn't. And I just remember everybody coming back and raving about you. Beyond that, I was writing a blog last week about population decline in Hawaii. You popped up. I saw a clip of you on the news. And it was concepts I hadn't heard. Something I was aware of, but just, how you spelled out what this population decline means for Hawaii. And it's a bleak picture. Affordable housing is one issue, but, it's adjacent to the population decline. If you wouldn't mind, just if you could touch on a little, it was maybe like a 2-minute clip. If you could just touch on that.
Sure. One of the things that I try my best to do, right, is to communicate clearly, succinctly. Mm-hmm. I think the challenge is there's so much information, and sometimes in order to be heard, you just have to cut sort of straight through it. And I'm lucky that the message cut through to you. I talk a lot about our population, and the question I always give people is, would you rather the population be growing or shrinking? And for Hawaii, in the last 100 years, say, for most of that time, the population was growing. Ever since World War II, population rapidly increased. So on some islands, it doubled. On some islands, it tripled. And on one island, it quadrupled in about the 60 years after World War II. As a result of that, most older folks, their experience of Hawaii has been the population's growing, everything's becoming too crowded. So their mental model of Hawaii is, oh no, too many people. Mm-hmm. But that is not the world that we've lived in for the last 8 years. We've been losing essentially 1% of our population every year for 8 years. That is not a minor decrease, right? That is the sign of a population that is sort of heading toward collapse. It's more similar to Japan or South Korea or Western Europe than it is to the rest of the United States. And I challenge people with this. Do you want to be growing or shrinking? Because there are a lot of problems associated with population growth, right? Environmental degradation, overcrowding, traffic, all of the things that people love to complain about in Hawaii. But the problems associated with population decline, in my opinion, are worse. And those are the problems we have today, right? You go into schools, there aren't teachers, there are shortages. You go into a hospital, there aren't enough nurses. You go into any restaurant and they're understaffed because they can't find people. And in the government, most government agencies, whether that's county or state, are operating on 20, sometimes 25% vacancies. County of Maui has about 3,200 positions. Only 2,400 of those are filled. That's like 700, 800 vacancies.
Somebody should do something about that.
Somebody should do something, but I'm doing my part, right? My wife and I have 4 kids, but not everybody's going to have 4 kids. Yeah. And that's a huge challenge that we have to grapple with. The problem, though, is a lot of our decision makers, their view of the world is kind of 20 years out of date. Yeah. They remember the 70s when everything was overcrowded, populations growing. The other thing, just to sort of wrap this up, is the economy was great when the population was growing. Actually, if you look at the line of like economic growth in Hawaii, it tracks perfectly with population growth. And so a lot of those baby boomers had a lot of opportunity. They were able to get wealthy. It's much harder to have economic growth as your population is declining. And that's a big part of why I think younger people are leaving, is the same opportunities that were there in the 70s, the 80s are just not here anymore. Yeah. And certain young people want to be in a vibrant place. What's more vibrant than economic growth, right? If you're talented, young, energetic, and you want to go after it, go get it. you want to go to a place that's growing. And if you look at the places people from Hawaii are leaving for, a lot of them are growing cities.
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas
Build.
could be in the American South in Texas. It could be Florida. It could be in the Northwest. But a lot of these cities that people are going to are growing, and that's not a Hawaii problem, right? In Japan, everybody's going from the countryside to Tokyo, right? Everybody wants to be where the action is, and if we continue to decline, fewer and fewer people will want to stay here, and it spirals. And to your point about it being bleak, that is one path of that spiraling.
Yeah.
What I like about, or not what I like, but what I'm getting from what you just said, and what the question that comes into my mind is population decline defined strictly by cost of living and housing? Because that seems to be what's in the forefront of the media. Housing, expensive housing, building multi-million-dollar condos, that's why the population is declining. But a lot of what you just said was people not having kids, people wanting to be in a place that's growing, where there's development, et cetera. Is that true?
So I think the housing is actually downstream of the central political question, right? Which is just growth, yes or no.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people in Hawaii, including people my mom's age, my grandparents' age, who say no. In fact, like there are a lot, if you go on the comment section of Star Advertiser or Civil Beat, or Hawaii News Now on Facebook, you can read these people who are like, I wish there were fewer people, right? People should leave Hawaii. I want fewer people.
Yeah.
So imagine you have a bunch of voters, and at a basic level, they want fewer people. Your housing decisions will reflect that. Your business decisions will reflect that. Hawaii is the worst state to do business in. If you wanted young, energetic people to stay here and start businesses and be entrepreneurial, you would try to make it as easy as possible to do business. If you wanted people to leave, you would make it as hard as possible to do business. So people may not consciously know that they're driving in this direction. But I do believe at a basic level, if your belief is, I want this place to shrink, everything you do will result in it shrinking. On the other hand, if you say, I love Hawaii, I want more people to call it home, I think it can be even better than it is today, then you show up in a different way in all ways, not just in
Absolutely.
housing.
No, I feel like that is something I can totally relate to, even as a real estate agent. Like watching my sister take her family, 4 of them, her husband and her 2 kids. And then my mom and my dad followed like a year and a half later. So we lost 6 people from my own family. Our auntie and uncle went, bought a house. We've got cousins that are there now. You know, I want them to stay. And I think the messaging, even with the content that we do on our channel, you know, telling people you need to buy a house, the comment section will go off with people being like, you effing realtor, stop selling out Hawaii. We're priced out of paradise and it's all your fault. And I'm like, I'm actually trying to get you guys to stay. Like, I know that that's why I'm here. I did not come from a family of wealth. You know, I come from struggle as well. And I was like, I'm going to buy a house. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was 22. And I'm like, it changed my life. And this is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to stay in Hawaii.
It's easy to bag on realtors, right?
I know.
Realtors are like lawyers in that, like, you can bag on them all day and everybody would be like, yeah, F those guys. I always say, right, okay, assume you want to buy a house, right? The average person thinks, I want to buy a house. Do they know how to do that?
Right.
And the answer is no. It's really hard, right? There's qualifying for a loan. Before you can even qualify for a loan, you probably need to straighten out your finances. And there's a whole process that realtors guide people through. And I think a lot of people take that for granted, right? Now, that's not to say that all realtors are good, but like in a world where there are no realtors, like if people could Thanos snap realtors away, I don't know if that's a better world. It
About
probably
half the population here.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Kauai is like gone, Maui, you know, like actually that would solve the housing crisis on the neighbor islands at least.
Totally.
But at the same time, right, like realtors are the people that guide people to home ownership. Realtors are people who help people make these consequential decisions. Can you imagine making $1 million decisions without any help?
Right.
No business person does that. And yet people who bag on realtors will do that. And in any profession, they're unscrupulous people, right? Like there are bad parents. We don't then say all parents are bad.
Yeah.
There are bad clergy members in the church. It doesn't mean that all religious people are evil. There are bad teachers that do bad things as students. It doesn't mean we hate teachers. So the question is like, realtors as a profession, good or bad, it's a nuanced discussion, but most people bagging on you guys in the comments or bagging on realtors in general, they're not there for a nuanced discussion, right?
No.
They just want to dunk on someone.
Totally.
And to say one more thing, usually that behavior is stemming from a place of hurt, right?
Yes.
Like a lot of people, and it's not just about housing, right? They feel frustrated. They feel like they're trying hard, but they're just not succeeding. They feel like something was promised to them, an American dream, and it's being snatched away from them. Inflation, eggs are like whatever, $12. Everything there contributes to that sense of frustration. And whether the scapegoat is some secret cabal or realtors or lawyers or government officials, peel-outicians, it's just this rage, right? And the rage doesn't care what it's eating. It just
Totally.
it needs to feed on something. It needs to burn something. And I don't blame people for feeling that way.
I don't either at all.
We were talking about this earlier, and I definitely want to hear from you on it. But you had mentioned that this is possibly your last housing conversation. So happy it's going to happen with us. Happy we were able to get the chance before you move on. I was thinking that if there's anything that gets bagged on or dragged in the comment section more than realtors, it's going to be affordable housing, or especially realtors talking about affordable housing. So you being, in my eyes, the mascot for affordable housing, and that may be the wrong, I may perceive that wrong, but again, you're kind of the guy that I attach to that topic, or at least to the concepts or to the conversation that that appeals to me. And I think I'd like to ask, like, in your opinion, does affordable housing have a branding problem?
Yes. Branding was exactly the word I was going to use. And the issue is this: affordable for whom? I was living on Maui for 2 years. My wife's from Maui. When we got married, I moved there, recently moved back to Kaka'ako. On Maui, one of the hospitals was contracting a cardiologist to come. This cardiologist is going to earn like $400,000, $500,000 a year, right? This is not a minimum wage job.
Yeah.
This is a highly trained person who's literally saving people when they have heart attacks. You probably want this person on Maui, right? You need one cardiologist to save people. They have some cardiologists interview for the position. They find somebody who's good, and then all of a sudden it's time for relocation. They can't find a house at the price point that they feel is adequate to the standard of life that they deserve. This person sacrificed, a decade of their life going through school. They've worked really hard to attain the top of their craft. They are wealthy by any normal standard, but their wealth comes from doing a service that I think we'd all agree is valuable, literally life-saving. So the question is, like, should we build a house for that person on Maui? It's going to be more than $1 million house. But they couldn't find a house at that price point that they thought was adequate to their needs. Go down a bit, though. Like I mentioned, 20 to 25% of civil service positions vacant across the state and county governments. Some departments can be 30%. Crazy to think about. Even important departments like police departments, right? Critical workers. These are not low-wage workers again, right? They're sort of solidly middle class. If you have 2 firefighters, they could be earning $150,000 or more, right? Married together. Should you be building housing for them, right? When people say affordable housing and they get mad at it, they're typically saying, I can't afford that. Right. I can't afford a $600,000 unit. Why are we building that? That's too expensive. And it's hard for anybody, especially a politician, to say, well, it's not for you. And that's why the politicians don't say that. They try to dance around the issue. But the truth is, you have to build housing at all of the price points, right? There's a homeless veteran who may only be able to pay a couple $100s a month through his benefits for housing, and he should have housing. There is somebody working a minimum wage job, working like $16 an hour, and there should be a housing option that's affordable for them. There is also a firefighter, a police officer, a nurse working a middle-class job. There's a small business owner earning that. And then there's somebody like a cardiologist, even a lawyer, or somebody who's doing a valuable job like engineering, who's earning significantly more, and there should be a house for them. So affordable housing suffers from that because when people hear affordable, they think about their wallet,
Yes.
not all the wallets that could exist. And again, to the frustration that people feel, it's hard to feel sympathy for the cardiologist, and it's hard to step out of whatever struggle someone's in and look at the bigger picture when you're struggling to feed your kids, you're stuck in traffic 2 hours a day, you don't know how you're going to make rent, your car breaks down, and you're screaming into the comment section.
Yep.
It's a branding problem, but there's no solution to that.
Is there no? Can
There's
that
no
not
solution.
be
You can't
rebranded?
people will use attainable housing, or they'll. It doesn't work.
Is it? I mean, is it not healthy? Would the healthiest for anybody watching anything about affordable housing? Should you ever interface with a new announcement of affordable housing project? Would it not be healthy to make the distinction, or is it safe, to make the distinction that affordable housing is the name of a program more than it is an adjective or an opinion of actual price?
Correct.
Right?
And some government programs just rename it. So there's a program called the Reserved Housing Program, and the units are reserved for sort of people in the middle of the income spectrum. And it's harder to get mad. It's reserved. Reserved for who? Somebody in the middle of the income spectrum. So you could rebrand it. You could give it another name. But at the end of the day, people are still going to be mad. Because, again, they're not mad about the affordable housing program. They're mad because they can't afford eggs and milk. They're mad because their car broke down and they don't know how they're going to fix it.
You touched on something earlier with the cardiologist analogy, and in thinking about Lahaina, and there's undoubtedly 100 different ideas on how to approach redevelopment there. I meant to ask you this, and you already went down this lane, but I believe, or at least the last that I've seen, has been Governor Green prominently talking about building workforce housing. It's your opinion that all types of housing should be there, or should be a part of any community if we wish to sustain that. Do you draw the line at any type of housing, like a price point, a type of house? Or does every type of housing in a community serve a purpose that provides a net benefit to said community?
I don't want to
in moderation.
I don't want to defend like
In moderation.
Bezos and Oprah, and
Yes.
and then the commenters are going to kill me for defending like luxury ranches.
It won't be you, it'll be us.
But like, imagine the spectrum. The problem, we are often saying, people in Hawaii saying, we build too much luxury housing. So one of the questions is like, why? And a basic answer is we've actually made it illegal to build affordable housing. So I'll give you two examples. The first example is what Governor Green calls kauhale, but what used to be called single room occupancy. So you've renovated homes. The most expensive rooms in the home are the kitchen and the bathroom, anything with water fixtures. Single room occupancy, you centralize the kitchen and bath, and you just get a room.
Yep.
And building a bedroom is pretty cheap, right? You don't need any pipes, nothing.
These are monster homes, right?
Well, no. This is like just the little homeless villages.
Oh, got it.
Right?
Okay.
The problem is that's illegal to build. We've been building these homeless kauhale villages across the state because a previous governor passed an emergency proclamation that suspended all of the laws that make it illegal.
Okay.
And these have been illegal for decades. So at the bottom, the thing that stops people from being homeless, especially men, was access to single room occupancy. They called them like men's hotels, is where men would stay. That doesn't exist anymore. And that was a decision. It was a legal decision that people in Hawaii and people across the United States made to make that illegal. Not every country in the world made it illegal, right? So that was a decision.
Was it something that was eroding fabric of communities, or I mean, how does this?
Of course, like that's how you justify
Sure.
banning anything. People wanted people to move into other housing opportunities. But if you remove any part of the spectrum of housing, you're going to cause dysfunction. The dysfunction that's caused when you remove the bottom rung of the housing ladder is homelessness. So the homeless villages that Governor Green has pursued are an awesome idea. It's the obvious solution for the people at the bottom. Then what we've made illegal a lot is multifamily dwelling. So in a lot of places in the state, you can have your home and one accessory dwelling unit, and there are limits on how many unrelated people can live in there. So we have low density single family housing. Just physics, you have limited land. If you require spacing out the homes and you keep them below, 25 feet, you're going to have less housing than if you raise that height limit and allow people to build more housing. Very basic. Most of the state of Hawaii is zoned for single family housing, and you can build at most one accessory dwelling unit. So letting people build a second accessory dwelling unit would probably help. Letting people build, maybe in Japan, right? A lot of areas have 3-story buildings. You rarely see a 3-story residential building in Hawaii because most zones are about 25 feet. If you push that up to 35 feet or even 40, all of a sudden you have 3-story buildings. If you have 3-story buildings, you can fit significantly more housing just in the areas where we already have housing. But again, we made that illegal, right? So those are just 2 examples. The question is, why do we have luxury housing? And the answer, one of the answers, is we made it illegal to build affordable housing.
That's incredible.
Isn't there a conversation, or isn't there a change coming to allow that second ADU?
Yes.
Where are we? I saw this floated. I thought it was
a bill was passed last year by the Hawaii State Legislature. It was called SB 3202, which does allow building a second accessory dwelling unit. Honolulu County, through its Bill 64, which is just the laws that regulate land use, now allows for one ADU and one sort of other accessory unit. The Big Island, Hawaii County, now allows for 3 accessory dwelling units, three accessory dwelling units on most residentially zoned lots. So they went above and beyond what the state required. Kauai was already in compliance. So the only county now that needs to pass a law to allow 2 accessory dwelling units is Maui County. But yeah, that was a simple change. It was passed last year at the legislature. And it was passed by a coalition of people and legislators who looked at the laws and realized, wait a second, maybe making building just one additional unit illegal is preventing a bunch of units from being built. Absolutely. Obviously it is.
Yeah. So I'm not making that up. I know I saw it, but when does the rubber meet the road on that? Who are we waiting on?
Just Maui County. So in Honolulu now, obviously they have to implement these things, right? So implementation at the state passes law, county's going to take some time to pass the law, to define the rules of what can be built. And then, maybe a year or 2 years down the line, you start to see people taking advantage of this. Also, business people have to wrap their minds around it, right? Like business folk are used to residential developer looks at a lot in terms of what was legal 5 years ago. Right. They'll have to update, well, what actually makes sense cost-wise that I could do on this property? And it'll take a while for the market to catch up, which is the real problem in housing policy or any policy is you are fighting today for a victory that will come 5 or 10 years later.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I understand oftentimes why our politicians either do nothing, or don't want to take risks, because let's say you do something. SB 3202 didn't pass unanimously. It was a real fight, and it was really close at the end. And there were a lot of legislators who are still upset about it because they feel like it's going to change the character of their neighborhoods in Manoa or even Salt Lake. And there are people who worry that it's going to affect their lives. Their neighbor's going to build an ADU and parking and all of these things. And I'm not going to deny that could happen to people. There are negative impacts. That policy is divisive. If you're a politician and I'm going to pass this law, people are going to write me angry emails, right? Maybe they're going to accost me in the Foodland checkout lane and say, why'd you do that? Should I do it even though people won't even build it for 5 years? Or should I vote no or do nothing?
Social consequences.
there are pressures, and our politicians. Well, some people don't believe this, but I believe politicians are humans too, and like all humans, they feel social pressure.
Yeah.
They don't want to be yelled at, and increasingly the abuse that politicians suffer. Last session there was another legislator, sort of made a social media video criticizing them. That person had a huge following, and that following then proceeded to make death threats against the other legislator's husband and children. Like death threats sent to the children's school. I mean, that's like creepy
Yeah.
and very close to home. So you imagine at that point, right? Like, how many people are going to step into this political arena? Let's say you believe in change, you really want to make a difference. But then you see your legislator and their family getting death threats,
Yeah.
right? Do you want your family getting death threats?
No.
So you start to shrink, people start to shrink back.
Sure.
And as a culture, right, if everyone starts to shrink back and be afraid, we enter a place where nothing happens.
Yeah.
And that's at least my read on part of why Hawaii has become dysfunctional is nobody wants the tall poppy syndrome, right? The nail that gets up the tallest gets hammered. Nobody wants to stand out. They're afraid to take a risk, especially if they're alone.
Culturally too, I mean, there's some elements there, right, of the tall poppy
Be
syndrome. I mean,
humble.
here relative to any other state in the nation, and it does feel. I'm sure there is an immune response to when someone does, and I think that's part of what we see in reactions, both in social media or even conversations that to me seem benign. Like you might someone who's pro development or building housing may have to eat dirt, in the comment section too. But yeah, that's an interesting take, and I will say I mentioned earlier, like I appreciate what you're talking about, the way you're talking about it, and there are others, talking to you, and then I also listen to Brenton, some of the concepts that he has. You guys have, I don't fully know or have heard him delve into all of his ideas to plant a flag and say this is what he wants or this is what he believes. But at surface level, like I hear you as being very pro-development. I hear Brenton as more of
Grow your own food.
or as it pertains to development. Let's this is growth. Where Brenton's like, let's put stop. You've got the go button, go light. Brenton's got the stop light, specifically related to, who's purchasing housing here, right?
Yeah, and I haven't spoken with Senator Awa, so I can't, vouch for his full opinion. But from what I've seen on social media, he and the people who resonate with him have what I think is a justified outrage over the sense that, call them foreigners, right? But people from outside of Hawaii are coming in and settling here and displacing longtime families. This is not a new thing, though, right? So on Oahu, a few years back, we passed the point where more than half of people were born outside of the state of Hawaii. But if you go to Kauai, that happened maybe in like 1980. Sure. In Maui, it probably happened decades ago in the plantation era when all those plantation workers went to Maui. On Hawaii Island, it happened a while back as well. Oahu just sort of caught up eventually. One of the things about that is like we really are a melting pot in that regard, where there is an indigenous culture, Native Hawaiians, who've been here for generations and generations. There are some of the early settlers, Europeans, and then there are the plantation laborers, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Portuguese, the Filipinos. There are more recent arrivals like the Koreans, Samoans, Tongans, and then the Micronesians who've come from places like Chuuk in recent years. Everyone has come at different times. I think there's a sense, though, lately, right, especially, say, during the pandemic, you had a bunch of remote workers from California, retirees from California who were fleeing from that place and wanted to settle in Hawaii. And because of social media, we now have this outrage machine where, one California Howley does something outrageous, and all of a sudden we're all upset about
Yeah.
that.
It's terrifying.
Right. But as a trend, this has been happening for a long time. And, my family, right, I could say, oh, we're fifth generation Japanese. But what does that mean? Like the question is, we say, and I use the word, I'm guilty of this too. The concept of local was invented.
Yes.
It was actually invented around the time of the Constitutional Convention in 1978 by folks like former Governor John Wahiawa, who wasn't governor then. He was just a young guy, and he was presiding over the Constitutional Convention. And there were dozens of people in the convention and only a couple Native Hawaiians. And John Wahiawa, a bunch of people, they wrote a treatise called Palaka Power, and they tried to create this concept of local because they wanted to create an identity between local Chinese, local Japanese, and local Hawaiians and try to create this identity, right? So we today use the word local and we think, oh, people have always thought of themselves as local. It's not true. I can show you about 50 years ago exactly when we started using this word local in the way we do today. We probably need a better term now, right? Because I think we can all acknowledge that there are people who are local, who were born here, who do not respect the Aina, who do not really care for Hawaii, who are pillaging it for all it's worth and don't see a future and don't really care what happens to their children or their grandchildren's generations. There are also people who moved here last year who do. And when we use the word local, we throw away a whole group of people and we give this acceptance to people where the only thing they did was being born here.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they've contributed in any meaningful sense. They could even be doing things that are actively bad. Like, do we really want local criminals? Is that a good thing? Local drug dealers? A lot of the drug dealers are local. Is that, would we rather have local drug dealers than foreign drug dealers? But these are political things, like the language we use is political. And we take for granted words like local and we throw them around. But when you think about it, it's like, what is local?
Yeah.
And I could tell you what it was. It was something that was created so that a small group of Native Hawaiians could have more influence. And they succeeded. It worked. They got OHA. They got all sorts of victories in that Constitutional Convention by convincing people that they were part of something bigger. To Senator Awa's point, I think the frustration people feel today is that they don't feel like there's something bigger that they're a part of. There doesn't seem to be a Hawaii, an aloha spirit or a bigger thing that people can identify with and can resonate with. People don't join political parties anymore, right? The Democratic Party of Hawaii is a shell of what it used to be. Labor union participation is declining. People don't go to the Elks Club or the Lions Club or the Rotary like they used to. So people are feeling alone, frustrated, and they want to believe in something or someone. I think that's why Senator Awa is so popular, because he speaks to the frustrations people feel. He's willing to say things that are unpopular.
Yeah.
He's willing to say things in a way that doesn't sound like a politician, in the way that somebody would talk in the Foodland line. And it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. But for some people, it's the first time they see somebody on that prominent a platform who's speaking
Like
for
that.
them, speaking like them, surfacing all the things they feel but don't know how to say, which is the other thing. Like, we all feel things, but we don't always have the words to describe how we feel. And a lot of times a politician or a public figure, whatever you want to call it, celebrity, influencer, what they are doing is just speaking and helping people articulate how they feel inside. And Senator Awa does that.
I feel like you do that. So it's funny you say that, because
How are you
I
not
thought,
a politician?
I know, because I thought you were a politician. Because when I told Yasu, we're going to have Sterling Higa, he's like, oh, who's that? I'm like, he's like this young politician. And then I'm like, wait a minute, you're not. Were you? An elected official?
No,
Going to be?
Are you appointed? Like, where?
Is that why you're here?
Are you running for office?
I'm a crisis actor. So I'm not a politician. So, okay, if you are well-spoken and you care about public things, people will encourage you to be a politician. So people all the time are like, you should run for this, you should run for that. I'm often, it really makes me worried, those conversations, right? Because, okay, I talk pretty, but like, what does that mean? right? Like, does it mean that my family is good, right? Does it mean that my faith is strong? Nobody knows that, right? There are lots of people who talk pretty, but their family is in shambles, right? They're violating the principles that they claim to espouse. And I feel like, for me at least, I'm just trying to be like a good husband and a good father. I'm trying when I show up, whether that's for work or if I'm serving on a board or helping somebody in the community, I'm trying just to be the best version of myself that day. But our politicians, it's a hard job. You know, these are like serious decisions that they're making, and you have to really be committed, and you have to sacrifice a whole lot of things. And I try my best to serve. I serve on the board of the Hawaii Community Development Authority, which is, it's one of dozens of boards and commissions. Lots of people serve that aren't in elected office. Our public servants oftentimes are getting paid less than they get in private market, and they're serving in various ways. I think our faith leaders, our nonprofit leaders, our labor leaders, everyone is serving in some way. We single out politicians because there's a title there and there's a name there, and they're on the news. But that's just because the news reports on what's sensational and what's interesting. I think more broadly about leadership, right? Which is what I really care about is leaders across the state and the counties. Are they able to make good decisions? Do they feel supported? Do they feel encouraged? And what I try to do is just encourage people who I think are doing a good job. I don't think there's anything political about that. I think it's just people are trying their best, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I try to look at the world through the lens of, I think people are trying their best. Obviously, there are some evil people, but most people are trying their best. And it's rare that someone actually validates that and encourages that.
Yeah.
So I'm not a politician. I know some folks that are politicians. The ones that are good, I try to encourage. I try to say, hey, good job, keep your chin up. Sometimes they face struggles, and I try to counsel them and give them advice, and that's the answer to your question. I don't know if that was a political answer to your question, but not a
No.
politician.
I don't think so. The one that grabbed me was the reel I saw you talking about Aria Lane. And that was the one where I was like, I need to talk to this guy because, like I said, you seemed like a politician, yet it seemed like you were advocating for Aria Lane. More so, you were advocating for young people to get involved in the decisions. And is that what Housing Hawaii's Future is about? Is
Yes.
getting the
Yes.
youth involved in this stuff?
So brief background, Aria Lane was a project proposed in Manoa at what I believe is the former St. Francis School
Just
site.
say was.
Is. I'm past tense.
Do you know something we don't know?
No. So Christine Camp
Yes.
of Avalon Development Group is the one who's proposing to redevelop it. There was a hearing on a Monday morning, like 10:30 a.m. At the Department of Planning and Permitting, which is in the Fosse building, which is this old, brutalist concrete building. It's very intimidating. You have to go through security, give them your ID, and they give you a badge, and then you can go into the building. Not a friendly place.
This is where the permit department is.
Yeah.
Also, right?
Not a friendly time,
not a friendly
10:30
place.
on a Monday
Right.
for anybody who's working. And yet this decision is about whether dozens and dozens of homes will be built in Manoa.
Yeah.
And of course, the people that showed up, because these are the people that can always have time to show up, were retirees who live in the area who are saying, no, it's going to increase traffic. And look, there are legitimate issues with this project. I think it should have 2 modes of exit and all sorts of stuff that we don't need to get into. But the bottom line is, if the people who are in the room every time are the people saying no, and there's never anybody in the room saying yes, the person on the other side of that hearing is only getting one perspective, right? No one is there saying yes because all the people who could say yes are driving to and from work, or they're working, or they're struggling with the price of eggs and milk at the grocery store. They have other stuff to do. And there's nobody who has a voice for those people, and Housing Hawaii's Future tries to, and other organizations do a good job, like Hawaii IMBI, of trying to be a voice saying, hey, maybe we should build housing. Now, the specific housing here was interesting, right? Because a lot of people said, well, it's not affordable. And so let's take the worst case. These are $1.5 million homes, but they're actually sort of 2-story homes with an in-law suite. So potentially, right, like me and my wife, we have 4 kids. We could live in some of those bedrooms, and my mom, who is now retired, could live in the in-law suite. We could pool, right? Like her savings, her retirement savings. She gets to live close to the kids. We now have childcare. We're combining incomes, my wife, my income.
You're also likely freeing up housing somewhere else.
Freeing up housing, right? So the housing ladder, if I move, the unit that I'm in opens up. And a lot of people in Hawaii are stuck somewhere on the housing ladder because there's nowhere for them to move to. And typically the jump is from renting to home ownership. There's rarely that entry level home ownership point, what we call starter homes, doesn't often get built. And the starter homes that do exist are occupied by people who would, in any normal market, sort of move up market. And a lot of those people, when they do want to own, go to Las Vegas or somewhere where they can get what they believe they deserve. Housing is obviously a place to lay your head. It's a place to store your stuff. It's a place where you feel safe. But for a lot of people, housing is a status thing. It signifies something about their place in the world. So if you're that cardiologist and what's available to you is a sort of rundown shack in Haiku, you're going to go, well, I didn't go to medical school for this, and you're going to go to somewhere else. People at the top want to feel like they're getting something that elevates their status, that makes them feel important. And that's a huge element of housing. It'd be silly for us, and sometimes we do in policy world, pretend that that's not the case, right? People do want to live in a luxury condo because it makes them feel good. And there's nothing wrong with that if they can afford it. It doesn't mean we should only build luxury condos, but we need to have steps along the ladder for everyone. No one shouldn't have safe, adequate housing. Everyone should have access to that. Not everyone needs a luxury condo. And this is a problem on neighbor islands, right? So on Maui, for example, people are upset about short-term rentals, and rightly so. Again, people coming in, it's becoming unaffordable. A lot of these short-term rentals are essentially sort of luxury condos, right? There's a huge pool, there's a lot of landscaping, it's basically like a resort, and so the maintenance fee is crazy high. Should a regular firefighter live there, right? Is that the right house for them, for what they need? Or do they need a home for their family? Where we have problems in Hawaii is just a mismatch, right? Our housing inventory, take all of the housing we have, and all of the housing needs are just matched to each other. One part of that is we didn't build a lot of housing that we made illegal a while back. One part of it is since like the 70s, we really stopped building like high-rise construction pretty much. After 1980, like we really didn't do too much high-rise until recently. It's funny, right? Everyone gets upset. Sorry, one last thing.
No,
Everyone
I love
gets
it. Keep
upset about
going.
Kaka'ako.
Yeah.
And they go, oh my God, they built all those high-rises. You know, it's blocking the view. Salt Lake. In the 70s, we built dozens of high-rises. Go to Makiki. We built dozens of high-rises in the 70s. And it's funny that the very same people who lived through that period of development, which if you just look at the buildings on Google Maps or out your window, you'll see way more buildings got built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s than have been built since 2000. But those people will be like, we're building, the cranes are everywhere. It's just not historical. And we forget, you know, one other note. I apologize. I'm going
I
on.
love it. Keep going.
Memory. So in Greek mythology, Mnemosyne is the mother of the muses. So Mnemosyne is the goddess essentially of memory. And all of the muses are the things, the creative energies, right? Like poetry, song, all of that. Part of that is this idea that you can only create something new if you remember the past. And I think that's true. Today we say our country is more fractured than ever. You know, it's going bad, right? Like everything's declining. In the 1970s, for about a decade, there was an act of domestic terrorism in the United States every week. Every week. The county building on Kauai was bombed twice in the 1970s. Bombs exploded in the county building. Boomers, right? The people who today have all the political power in Hawaii, they lived through that. And the boomers are like, it's worse today than it's ever been. I'm like, when you were 20, there were bombs blowing up in the county buildings. You can go Google this.
What are you, Benjamin Button? Like, how do you know this stuff?
Well, you read some books and you hold on to some facts
Crazy.
and you talk to some elders and you learn these stories and you get a perspective, right? Like I think part of the problem is we're always victims of this moment.
Yes.
And if we can't look back, there's no way to think forward, right? Like when I try to think 20, 30, 40 years into the future, I'm first going 20, 30, 40 years into the past, right? Like you can't understand Hawaii in 2025 without understanding Hawaii in 1959 in statehood, right? You can't understand that if you don't go back to 1893. You can't go back to 1776. You have to go back to Maili Kukahi, right? I think the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest Hawaiian chief, the chief of Oahu, the progenitor of the Ahupua'a system. This is a chief who redefined land use, who redefined civil service, who redefined every administrative function on the island of Oahu. And this happened hundreds of years ago. What was happening when he was making decisions, right? What pressures was he grappling with? Was it population decline? Was it famine? Was it all sorts of struggles? And yet, on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with just the resources available to him and his people, they were able to resolve these problems and have solutions. So this idea that we're screwed, right, and there's no solution, I don't think is correct, right? Like, yes, it looks bleak, but humans are resourceful.
Yes.
And we've done this before, right? And so history is this reservoir of inspiration for those who know to go there and drink, because you can see how people have solved problems and bigger problems, right? We complain now when the Wi-Fi goes out. There were people who had to carry water from wells, who still carry water from wells. You can read horrific stories about women right after they give birth who then have to go to the well and pull up water. That's the human experience. Those women did that. Our ancestors did tremendous things. They built everything that we enjoy.
I've seen a statistic. Bottom 1% today live better than the top 1% in 1920.
Oh, we're kings.
Yeah, just the
and
perspective of that.
and we take it for granted, right? Like we turn on the electricity and a light shines. When people for human history lived in darkness, and there's still parts of the world. Look at the nighttime satellite view of North Korea. There's still people living in darkness today. We have access to all of recorded information, right? If I want to go and read history books, I can read any history book. I get a Kindle for $100, and now I can read pretty much any book, right? I go on the library, I can download any book, read any book. We have access to so much, and it's easy, I think, when when the car breaks down, when you feel like you're losing your job, to feel like this is the end, right? Or it's too much.
I mean, the velocity of information today is,
It can be too much.
unfathomable to people back
It could be
then,
too
right?
much. Well,
And for better or for worse.
Part of the
And-
problem is we're not adapted to it.
Yeah, but not without experiencing it, right? We will eventually, right? And I think, I'm happy that the conversations, the ones you're having, the one Brenton are having, but yeah, that the amount of people who have a voice today and sifting between, discerning between who's worthy of listening to, that's a tough deal. I'm happy for that problem though, that's a problem that does exist, and that, we all have the autonomy or the agency to find those voices that, and to be corrected or to be affirmed, right?
Rewind 200 years, and you just have access to the people within 20 miles of you.
Yeah. In one newspaper, or
Yeah.
further back.
That's
Right.
true.
And, yes, there was communication, there were letters, there's information transmitting, but very little. Not like today. I can talk to my mom, right? She's miles away. I can talk to my grandma. She's miles away. I could talk to both of them on FaceTime
That's
at the
true.
same time. That's kind of crazy.
Why are you on this scent?
Yeah. I love truth.
That's good.
I believe in God. I try my best every day to pray and ask him what I should be doing. Obviously, being a husband and a father is the most important thing to me in my life, in terms of if I segment my family, right? There's faith, then there's family, and then there's how I show up in the world. I care deeply about Hawaii. I grew up here. I see myself staying here for a long time, the rest of my life. I'd like to spend some time in Japan with my wife, but I love Hawaii. And I want our leaders to make decisions, right? I think there were chiefs in the time of Maili Kukahi who came together and found solutions to really complex social challenges and created things that we today marvel at, right? Today we talk about the Ahupua'a system with reverence, but we also talk about it as something that existed forever. That's not true. It was created by humans, and it was created by humans who were responding to a very specific set of problems. So the question today is like, they're chiefs of Hawaii, right? They're business leaders, they're government leaders, they're nonprofit leaders, they're labor leaders, they're faith leaders, they're leaders in the community. They lead a martial arts dojo or a sports team, recreational league. And the question is, are they thinking about these big issues? Do they have good information about what's happening? And are they convening with each other and discussing seriously how can we solve them? And that's the only way that humans have ever solved problems, right? Is when we come together, we accept that a problem exists, and we discuss how to solve it. No one person has all the answers. It's insane to expect that. No one human can see things from all perspectives. And at its best, the political process, which is why I love politics, I think it's important. At its best, that's what politics is, right? We say politics to describe government, right? But politics is just how humans solve problems together. That's why we talk about office politics, right? Politics is in a family too. It's just how we solve problems together. We think of politics as democracy, as voting. But politics is when a husband and wife have a conversation, right? And sort something out. Politics sometimes is yelling, right? Other times politics is softer and more diplomatic. But in the absence of that quest to solve problems, they just get worse.
Yeah. What is the one solution you're bringing to the table? Or what is one of them? Not the one. Because I feel like you're a solutions guy. There's other people in government who get everybody like riled up and get the following behind them. Even me, I'm like, heck yeah, after I hear somebody give like a powerful speech. And then I'm like, okay, what are we doing again? So what's one of the solutions?
I co-founded Housing Hawaii's Future, led it for 3.5 years, and recently handed over leadership to Lee Wang, who's serving as executive director. He's doing great. And I left to co-found a company called Policy Compass. And essentially, we are using AI to help solve this problem of politics. So at a basic level, one of the problems of politics is so much is happening in the state of Hawaii. In a given week, now while the ledge is in session, there could be more than 100 hours of government meetings. State legislature, county council, boards, commissions. No human has 100 hours to watch all of this. But in an era of AI, you can watch all of it. And not only can you watch all of it, but you can tell people whether they're a labor leader or a business leader or a nonprofit leader or a government leader. You could sift it and find what's important for them. You can find the needle in the haystack on the issues they care about and give it to them. And that's what we're doing at Policy Compass, because what I've observed and what worries me is our leaders, the people we trust to make these important decisions, oftentimes the data they have, the information they have isn't good or it isn't timely. They're really struggling. I've talked to county council members who don't know what's happening at the state legislature. I've talked to state legislators who don't know what's happening at their county council. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because there's a lot going on. And oftentimes their staff are underpaid, overworked, and they can't keep track of everything. So if you could make it easier to track what's happening, if you could give people the best information, my hope is that that would help them to make better decisions. And my goal for this company is, I think it's modest but achievable, is if I could give the leaders of Hawaii 5% better information, maybe decisions get a little bit better, right? And I think that's where we have to be ambitious to believe we can solve problems, but pragmatic in what we're doing to solve it, right? Like, yeah, I'd like to solve all these problems, but I don't think Policy Compass is going to solve all the problems. I think it can give a little bit better information. People can do that in minor ways too, right? Like, I don't think I can stop all people from rage posting in the comment section, but maybe I can stop. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or maybe I can tell my friend, hey, you went a little bit hard there, right? Like, cool off a bit. It's those little things that add up. There's 1 million people on the island of Oahu, roughly, maybe 1.4, probably less than that statewide. Everybody has a role to play in the story of Hawaii and what it is, what it was, what it is, what it's becoming. And people have to embrace that. And leadership looks different depending on where people are situated. Everyone can be better, though. I believe that. I tell my kids that. I tell myself that. And if we're trying every day to be a little bit better, and we're all doing that, and we're working together and encouraging each other, we can be better. And when you see cultures that are dynamic, that solve problems, that's what's happening. When you see cultures where people are shrugging their shoulders and saying, I give up, no hope, things get worse.
Yeah.
And I understand why people feel like that. There are days, you won't see it, right? I won't be on Instagram saying it, but my wife will see it where I have doubts, I have uncertainties. But that's no way to live.
I'm excited. Policy Compass. Okay, so I'm going to bridge two of your worlds, and I hope this is okay. So you're on the board of the HCDA. So that's something that we're familiar with as real estate agents and rarely are we involved in affordable housing. We're in the conversation, but the one that we are the closest to is reserved housing. That's the one that we have the ability to sell, and we find buyers for these projects, et cetera. So I'm excited for Policy Compass to provide information to the reserved housing people who are setting the guidelines for the shared appreciation term.
The buyback period.
The buyback period. The Koa, you wrote it down, and it was so good. That reserved housing, we love it. We love the price points. We love the opportunity. But there's almost like a de-incentive. What is the word?
Ask him. Disincentive.
People are disincentivized.
You got it. Yeah. Everyone knows what you mean.
People are disincentivized to have kids, get married, because you're buying a 1-bedroom and you have to live in it for 10 years. Yeah. Isn't this dangerous? Isn't this leading to population decline? Yeah.
And I'll say, not every realtor interfaces with affordable housing at all. You may not ever guide a buyer because of the complexities of that program, being able to fully spell it out for a buyer, being able to fully crystal ball what their future or what avenues this could take them down, right? And I'll say that's something that I didn't always, but in this new climate of affordability or lack thereof, where prices are today, where the maintenance fees are today, where they're going tomorrow, and the interest rates, I struggle sometimes, especially with that single household, maybe even that young couple, that in my view might be choosing between upward mobility in their careers or in their relationship, and their income, and a studio or a 1-bedroom, right? And it's tough to have a buyer look at you and say, do you think I should do this 1-bedroom? Yeah. I have to stay here for 10 years. No one can move in with me. If I leave, there is an avenue for you to leave, but it's not one that positions you well or that sees you with any real tangible benefit if you leave. So you have to stay. In 10 years, especially for the buyers that are eligible and do qualify, that fit in this small box, they're very likely a young professional, and they're going to fall between 25 and 35 years old. But that's also where the most important decisions of their life fall in terms of relationships, choosing partners, whether they're going to have kids or not. It's already it's already, the decision to have a child here relative to, I have one child, and I, have to hyperanalyze when I'm going to have the second. You have,
Hang out with him.
yeah, I know.
He's like,
Yeah.
go.
But that is the struggle I have sometimes, and I'm just thinking, is this right for them? Do they even know if this is right? Is it my place to say it is or isn't? And where that takes me is there anything that can be done? Is it a fluid conversation with HCDA or HHFTC, those bodies? I know their intent of the program. They are sincere in seeing this program serve those in need of housing. I mean, to the T. I've seen it. I know the hearts of those people. It's never going to be a perfect program. They look to do everything they can to close those loopholes that some do jump through. But is there a conversation about the ceiling or seeing any fluidity in changing that program?
This is a yes, but the yes is all of these things can change, right? From this program, the reserved housing program, all the way up to the structure of the government through a constitutional convention. The problem, right? So I'll talk about this particular case, but also how it manifests in other areas. Let's say the board of HCDA decides to change the rule. So we say, 10 years is too long. We want to make it 5 years.
There's also a 30-year.
Right. People will show up.
Yeah.
And the news will report. And people will say, people are going to buy it and they're going to flip it.
They're going to make money.
They're going to make money. Put yourself on the other side, right? You're a civil servant. You've worked for HCDA for decades. All of a sudden, people are showing up, yelling at you,
There it is
harassing
again.
you. You may know, right, in your heart that this would be the right thing to do. But if you step out alone, right, if you're the one that proposes this change, you don't have supporters, people who will come and testify, experts who understand the problem and can explain how it works, you're going to be in a tough situation in that scenario. So I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's perfect. I think it does need to be changed and can improve. But this is just one instance, right, that we're all familiar with of the broader problem, which is a lot of us know what's wrong. And many of us actually know how to fix it. But taking that step out to say, hey, right, put my finger up and say, hey, here's a problem. What do we do? That's hard for a lot of people to do. And part of it is in school, they teach you math, science, English. They don't teach you how to build a coalition and advocate for a policy, right? They don't teach you how to prep your testimony before you show up to a committee meeting and maybe even have the speaker order for 3 of the people who are going to testify. So you start hitting different points in order to build to like a satisfying conclusion. I didn't learn that at Roosevelt. I love Roosevelt. I didn't learn that at Roosevelt. So you have to, the starting place, right, for changing these things is the basic sort of civic literacy, right? Understanding how does the process work? Who are the people who can change it? And then building relationships with them, right? So take HCDA, for instance. I know the staff. I think they're great. They are very receptive to ideas, right? You meet with them, you say, hey, I have this idea to change it. They'll have conversations. Same with the folks at HHFTC. I think they work really hard. Once you come with, well, I think we should change it, then it's a matter of you start thinking, okay, board members, maybe I can lobby the board members. Obviously, there are laws around that, so you have to be careful. You can't, buy them a steak dinner, but you can ask them out for coffee and let them pay for their coffee and talk with them and say, hey, I see this issue. Then you go one step further and you get to the point of maybe you get one of the board members to introduce a measure that says we should do this thing. Unfortunately, right, you're here and you've thought about this. Most people, when they see a problem in government, they don't have the time or the energy to go through that process. So the problems fester and they get worse. And then to your point about the frustration, somebody's going through this home buying process or they get stuck with this and they realize it's not appropriate for them later because their realtor didn't help them to understand what they were getting into. And they start screaming at government and they're frustrated with everything. But it's a one instance of the broader thing, which is these laws, everything around us, the physical structures, they were made by people. They can be unmade by people. They can be remade by people. A law is not fixed. This reserved housing rule, sure as hell, is not fixed. One example is before 801 South Street was built, the Marshall Hung project on South Street, 801 South Street, hence the name. The laws governing workforce housing were much more permissive. And I think that project is one of the best workforce housing projects that's ever been built in the state of Hawaii. Today, those units are affordable for sale and rental prices at the exact same area median income that they were initially sold at, which should be true in workforce housing. The problem was the neighboring buildings, when it was going up, said, "They're blocking my view," and they sued them and slowed them down. And then after it was built, those same people highlighted a few instances, cherry-picked of maybe somebody reselling a unit. And so they changed some of these buyback rules. They extended these buyback terms. But what it wasn't somebody looking at data and making an informed decision about what they should do. It was some politician or some civil servant
Emotional
getting
decision.
a ton of heat, feeling attacked, saying, I got to do something.
It's a good headline.
And doing it. And that's where the data, the information really matters. Not that emotions should never factor into our decision making. They should. But we have to be dispassionate. And we have to salute politicians. If a politician had stood up in that moment and said, look, 1,000 people got homes here. If 2 of them flipped their homes and made a profit, like, yeah, that's bad. But we're not going to change the program because 998 people got homes and did the right thing. And I'm not saying the data is that good, but I've seen the data from this project. Housing Hawaii's Future did research on it. And the vast majority of people kept their units and are still in their units. There were very few resales. It's always possible, though, for the news or for somebody who wants to shut something down to find the one instance, right, where somebody's acting badly. Kalani English takes a bribe, all politicians are corrupt. That's not true. Yes, some politicians are corrupt. Some are taking poker chips. That's not good. But the vast majority of politicians are showing up every day trying to make a difference the best they can. And we have to take people at their best, right? Assume that they're acting in good faith and show up accordingly. So to this program, right, my recommendation, obviously you're talking to me. I'm a member of the board, but there are other members of the board. They're people, you know their contact information. You can find them. You can say, hey, I have this issue. You know, do you think you could do something? You could talk to the executive director. You could talk to some of the staff who oversee the program and say, hey, I have this idea. And usually in that conversation, they'll say, well, we can't do this because of X reason. And you'll go, oh, yeah, okay, that's fair. But they'll go, but maybe we can do this. And then you find that solution. And the conversation leads to the solution.
But Policy Compass is going to help these conversations because
gotta hope so.
I know.
Yes.
Because we're going to have the data.
Yeah, have the data and just be informed on what's happening, the bigger picture. I always say a lot of times in government, we're guilty of cloud watching. So a bill is like a cloud in the sky, right? HB 764, it's here, it's there, it becomes a law, it goes away. It's either a happy cloud or a sad cloud. What we really need to know is the weather. But even better than knowing the big picture of the weather, we need a weather forecast. We need to know where are we going if we keep going down this road. We need a climate model. We need to know if the sea levels are rising. We need to know if things are getting hotter or colder. And in the past, before AI, we couldn't do that for government. There was just too much information for humans to take in and process. I'm not saying AI is going to solve all these problems, but there's a lot of stuff that it can do really well. And in Hawaii especially, we have a shrinking workforce, aging workforce. People are staying in their jobs for shorter amounts of times. The amount of time it takes to really understand an organization, let's say you work for a bank, to understand your bank and also understand the government is longer than the 3.9 years you're likely to stay in that job. So if you want expertise on how your nonprofit, your labor union, your business, you as a legislator fit into the bigger picture, you're going to have data that can paint that bigger picture. And up until this point, we haven't been able to generate that. But at Policy Compass, we know it's possible because we're doing it. And that's what we want to make accessible to people in the future.
Is the goal just to, create just massive amounts of SOPs for companies.
You can make
or
suggestions.
Employees to.
I don't know about SOPs. It's more okay. So at the legislature, there are about 3,000 bills introduced every year. A question you might ask if you're a labor union is how many of these affect me, right? And what I care about. Or let's say you're a climate change advocate. You want to know of the county councils, there are 4 of them. They're meeting all the time. Is there anything that affects climate change?
Yeah.
And nobody has the time to go through everything. I hope in the future, no one needs to log on to a government website. I don't want to.
No.
But we have the technology now to give people the awareness of what they care about. And if we want civic engagement, right, which is, it's to your point, the 2 of you showing up and saying, hey, we got to change this thing. The first step is awareness of the problem. You're aware because you've encountered the problem. Most people don't know what HCDA is, right? I say HCDA, they go, is that an
Okay.
auto repair shop? I say reserved housing, they go, reserve for who?
what?
Like,
Yeah.
and that's okay. It's not relevant to them. It's relevant to you. And there is something in government that's relevant to everyone. But the news isn't going to tell you that. You know, it's to bring back Senator Awa. He was in the news, right? Because
Yes.
of the mahu comment. The mahu comment got so much coverage.
Yes.
In the couple of weeks before that, there were like 100 hours of informational briefings at the Capitol. Every department went in to present its budget, answered questions from senators. How much reporting was there about the 100 hours of every department telling the state what it's doing versus Brenton Awa's one mahu comment?
Yeah.
The answer is the mahu comment had more coverage than all 100 hours.
Should call it the Mahu hours.
Well, the news has a mahu problem, right?
Yes.
The mahu problem is you say one word,
Yeah.
and the news is going to fixate on the one word
Yep.
and ignore everything else that matters.
Yep.
Now, in the grand scheme of people's lives, did his remarks, were they maybe offensive to people? Sure. Does it matter?
No.
Compared to what happened the 2 weeks before? Absolutely not. But the news is always going to go there.
Yeah.
Because they know that,
Yeah.
I mean, I saw the comment sections, right?
Yeah.
It got wild in
Yeah.
the comments.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to tell you about what happened in the finance committee briefing on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And that's where Policy Compass is trying to bridge that gap.
That's
It's
cool.
interesting because I mean, I don't reading every bill that comes out is not on on my priority list of things and ways to feed my family or to feed my spirit either. But when bills do come out, I'll throw them into Chat GPT and I'll say, "This is what I do. This is who I am. These are my motives. Tell me what this means to me." And that has made, like, in terms of keeping me in the loop and me, understanding what's happening in 30 seconds and how it specifically applies to me and what I care about. So I can understand I can see it through that lens.
Yeah, and ChatGPT, for most people watching this, will do a great job at this. A lot of this you could do yourself. The reason, I would think it was put on me to create Policy Compass is there are things that ChatGPT will miss about Hawaii, right? It doesn't really know the history. It doesn't really know the people here. It doesn't really know our laws, our municipal code, our administrative rules, the HCDA bylaws, right? It doesn't know that. So if you could train that large language model, though, to understand the context of Hawaii, and you ask it those same questions, right? Here's who I am. Here's what I care about. What does it mean for me? The answer is going to be way better.
Yeah.
And for our decision makers who are making consequential business decisions, whether or not to start a company, whether or not to invest in a property, for a labor leader who's trying to figure out what's happening for my 6,000 members, for a nonprofit leader who, like me at Housing Hawaii's Future, who wants to know what's going on that affects the future of housing, keeping track of that is impossible, but you need something that understands the nuance of Hawaii. And you need a company that actually cares, right? Because there are companies that provide similar services like bill tracking and stuff. None of those companies are in Hawaii, right? They're national companies. We are a fingernail in terms of their market. they're not going to build a product for us. They're not going to sell it here. They're not going to work with people here, give them customer support. So if we want these kinds of tools, we're going to have to build them ourselves. And it's not just Policy Compass, right? There are all sorts of applications of AI that can make everything we do more efficient. And for some people, it can seem scary. People are like, oh, it's going to replace jobs. I don't think the problem in Hawaii is we have too many workers. I don't know any employer who says, oh, you know what we have? We have too many applicants for the job.
Yeah.
The problem right now is our population is cratering, but there are important jobs that need to be done. And so for the jobs that aren't important but still need to be done that AI could do, like we got to get AI to do them fast, because every human who's here, who can work, who can contribute, should be doing something meaningful that AI can't do, right? AI is not going to be a nurse, so people can be nurses. Do those people who are nurses need to be logging onto the government website and reading 3,000 bills? I don't think so. So shift those people over to where they can be helpful and also do things that are meaningful, right? Like the meaningful part of government affairs is not reading bills. It's not all of that. It's having that conversation with a legislator, right? It's having that discussion. It's showing up to a meeting and actually being present with other people. All the steps in the beginning can be automated easily, and we should automate those things. So, I'm hopeful that Policy Compass not only can help solve this problem, but kind of model how entrepreneurs in Hawaii can solve problems, whether they're business problems or government problems, using technology, because population is not going to rebound. As much as I might be trying with my wife, we're not going to rebound the population. I hope you have at least one more, and soon.
Yeah.
But we're not going to save it, right? The curve's going down. It's not going to go back up.
You're on the Elon trajectory.
Right. And I wish we could go back up, but we're not going to get there. So the question is, given the problems we have, right, the conditions, the climate, what can we do? And the answer is there are solutions. We can achieve them. Again, Maili Kukahi, who, people listening who are like, who's that? Look him up, right? Like, there are leaders in relatively recent history, just a few hundred years ago, who did incredible things. And we don't highlight what they accomplished. We don't highlight what they did. If we did highlight what they did, we would feel sort of shameful
Totally.
for what we don't do, right?
Yeah.
History is a mirror that shows us who we are, right? You can look back at your ancestors and what they did and say, should I be complaining about traffic? Like, traffic's a good problem. They didn't have cars,
Yes.
right? They walked. You go on Maui, right? And there's the old highway that goes around the island. And you're thinking, oh, they were just walking, right? They walked around the island. People drive to Lahaina today. They're like, oh man, there's traffic. It's too far, right, to get to West Maui. People were walking. There are all of these things that we can be grateful for. And
It's so true, especially Hawaiians. I've told Hawaiians this before. I think I said it in church. It was after the Lahaina fires, and my pastor was like, Mila, you're Hawaiian. Can you speak about the fires? And I'm like, I think that we just need to band together. We need to pray, and we need to not be victims, and we need to not be sad. Hawaiians, there are some Hawaiians in our legacy that were warriors. They were so badass. And so, like, Maili Kukahi, I'm totally going to read up on this person. Because you're right. It's like we need to know about these things. We need to be able to identify with the ones that won, rather than like trauma.
It's what you said about prayer, though, right? I mean, for me, it's really important. I think it is important for everyone, right? Like, if you have a relationship with God or, a higher power, there are some things that you don't need to be afraid of, right? So I heard somebody being interviewed once, and they had received death threats, and the interviewer asked them, do you get afraid about the death threats? And the person said, my children are grown. I believe in God. I'm not afraid of anyone. I thought about that. I was like,
Dang.
man, I wish I had that, I want to get there. But that's true, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you believe in God, if you believe in a higher power, if you know that there's something after this and something greater than this existence, all the suffering of this existence is momentary and it's fleeting. It doesn't mean that this existence doesn't matter. I think it does.
Yeah.
I think there's a grand cosmic significance to what we're doing here. that every action has significance, right? That it's either adding up to something great or subtracting down to something horrific. We have a choice every moment of how we're going to show up. And prayer, right? Like just aligning yourself with God, with what's going on here, for me at least, right, is my way of staying grounded when I feel frustrated, right? Or when I start to take things too seriously. You know, we all can take our own shit too seriously.
Totally.
If you know that there's something bigger and you can remember all the times you were silly, right? It's hard to take yourself that seriously.
I'm a blip, right, in this.
Yeah.
The
Well,
whole thing,
my
right?
daughter, how old is your
15.
15? Okay. So my oldest is 14. Our daughter is 2. 2 years ago, she didn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
What a
I
miracle.
watched the bump and now she's running. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's actually crazy. And there will come a time, right, where we don't exist, and hopefully she still exists and her children exist. And there's eons before and hopefully eons after, and we're here for a moment, and it's fun.
Thinking about your kids and the work that you do, everything you know, I mean, it's probably my last thread on affordable housing, but in all the work that you've been doing and all of the issues you're aware of, and this housing issue that's specifically affecting Hawaii, you've said a lot in the way of, you know, what our leaders can do, what you choose to do, the words that you choose to put towards policies and towards change. What's the one-to-one on your conversations? How does that inform your conversations with your kids? What is your message to your kids, given these issues that you know better than anyone?
I wouldn't say better than anyone.
Better than anyone I know.
So, you know, I try to be real with them, right? I say housing in Hawaii is expensive, first of all, right? You want to call Hawaii home in the future. If you get a minimum wage job, it's going to be very hard. Maybe mom and dad could help in some way, but I don't know if we can help that much. So I tell them, right, you have to understand finance. You have to understand how credit works. You have to understand how debt works. You have to understand how to get a job that pays you well and compensates you. And if you want to become a homeowner, and not everybody needs to, not everybody should,
No.
there are certain steps you can take early to get there. And that's kind of the message for them, right? You know, the 14-year-old is still not quite there,
Yeah.
but I feel like in our home, I try because, you know, I didn't necessarily grow up talking about money, right? And talking about these kinds of things. I try to make sure that that's present in our conversations, right? That I'm not, my wife and I will share our financial statements with the kids. They have an awareness of what our budget is. You know, sometimes kids can take things for granted, right? Like, oh, there's food in the fridge and their lights are on and we live in a nice place. And then they have no perspective on money, right? But you start to show them, well, here's the rent, here's the electricity, here's how much we spend at Costco, here's what we spend on gas, here's what we spend on insurance, here's the Netflix subscription. And you can see their eyes sort of get bigger and they're like, whoa, that's a lot of money. And then I go, okay, and how long would it take you to earn that at $15 an hour? And they go, oh, whoa, right? Their eyes get sort of big and they realize, well, maybe my dream of working at a boba shop is not going to sustain my life, right? Which is fine.
Yeah.
My son, though, he's 10, and younger son, Isaac, and he loves boba. He loves sweets. And sometimes I feel like his career aspirations are informed by what he's eaten most recently. So the other day, he comes in and he tells my wife, he's like, I want to own a boba shop, right? Like dad's building a company, dad's a business owner. I want to be a business owner. I want to own a boba shop. What I love about my wife is she said, why one?
She's awesome.
Right. I mean, but there are little things I think I try to do, my wife does as parents. I think the biggest thing is just getting them to dream big, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, if you grew up here, even if you grew up poor, you can become a homeowner, right? You became a homeowner young. People can rise, especially if they work hard, if they're diligent, they care about learning. That's what I try to foster in the kids. The specific stuff about real estate,
Yeah.
I'll let them figure it out as they get old. I figure if they know how to read, they know how to write, they know how to do arithmetic, they have some basic financial awareness, they can figure out the rest when they're ready to. I'm not going to cram it down their throat, but I am proud of my son Isaac. I'll just say that, and maybe he can watch this later. We've been having conversations. He'll ask me. He'll be like, "So if you give 40% of the company in equity to someone, like, can they just leave tomorrow and take it with them?" And I have to explain like vesting and like performance-based
Wow.
compensation. And these are conversations when I was 10. I was talking about Pokemon. You know what I mean? So I think that's the biggest thing. Is like we assume. I assume, I don't want to generalize. I assume sometimes, right? Like, oh, he's 10. Like, he won't understand what I think about. But the little kid knows about equity. Like, he understands the difference between equity and cash compensation. And so we underestimate what kids are capable of if you take them seriously, answer their questions, and you're patient with them. When I taught middle school, high school, and even university, I noticed that. I'm like, you can baby students and they'll be babies. Or you can treat them like adults and they'll rise to that, in my experience. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, says that he doesn't give up on people. He prefers to torture them into greatness.
I love it.
I love it, right? That's what, don't tell my kids that, right? But what I would like to do is torture them into greatness, right? Like you just have to have the conception that the person in front of you can be way more than they are today. And I think a lot of leadership is transferring that confidence, right? Like most people don't have the confidence that they can be greater than they are today.
Yep.
They feel like I suck, I'll always suck. This is the way it has to be. And part of that is when they were young, like their dad or their mom or their grandpa or their uncle said, "You're stupid," and they said, "Oh, I'm stupid." And for 30 years now, right? They've just said, when any opportunity comes up to prove that they're smart, they think, "Oh, I'm stupid," right? There's an opportunity to read a book. They say, "Oh, I'm stupid. I wouldn't read a book." If you just tell people the opposite, though, right? And you tell them, "Hey, actually, you can do whatever you want," right? Why one boba shop? Why not 5? Why
That
not 10? Why not a
rocks.
new boba chain, right? Like, why not the real estate under the boba shop, right? Like, just dream big. The school system, and our kids are homeschooled. I think in a lot of ways, the school system kind of crushes that out of
Yeah.
kids. Right? It doesn't teach them to dream big. It crushes their aspirations. For our kids, we just want them to, to love God, right? To follow the commandments as best they can, to love their neighbors, to be disciples of Jesus. And after that, like if they want to buy a house or not, I'm okay.
Totally.
If they do want to just work at a boba shop, cool, right? Like that part is important. But
You said this all so much more eloquently than I did once on a podcast. I was saying that I want to help people of Hawaii and the mindset. And I just wish that parents would not say things to their kids at home like, "It's too expensive. You guys are never going to be able to buy here. You're never going to be able to stay here. Or you're going to have to move to Vegas." So anyway, I was kind of saying what you just said, but I said it quicker. And I got so much heat on social media. Just people who were like, "Why would you lie to the kids? You need to tell them how hard it is." Toxic positivity. I was like, what? Like, this is crazy.
I had a client, most memorable one, and wild woman, but it's a legit force of nature. She's half Peruvian, half Italian, self-made, millionaire, government contractor. And she's in town. I'm showing her property. She brought her 15-year-old son with her. And car rides were just nonstop talk about growth and companies and business. And she's always making sure her son in the back is paying attention. And I remember her saying, "My son, Christopher, is starting a supply company." And I'm thinking 15 years old and everything that she's saying to this kid. And I was thinking what I was doing at 15 years old, and it was working at a cheap buffet, praying that my ex-con coworkers would stop putting the mop water in the macaroni,
Oh my gosh.
So, and I didn't last long there. I was either afraid to die from the mopperoni or to die from snitching on the recipe, but that, those moments stuck with me as someone who had never heard those conversations myself. those conversations to him that she was having might as well have been any conversation that any parent would have with a kid. Like, that was his normal. That was there was no limit. There was no ceiling on what he was supposed to do, could do. This is what mom's doing. This is how mom thinks about the world. And these are options for you, how you should or how you can, right?
And this is the promise and peril of the internet, right? Like, on the downside, there's like porn and cat videos and all kinds of stuff. You could just scroll forever and your brain will rot and die. On the positive side, you can listen to any of these conversations, right? Like, you could spend all day, 10 hours tomorrow that you're awake, listening to billionaires talk about how they became billionaires, right? Our children, one of the things they have to do every day is listen to a history podcast. And one of their favorites, which I recommend to everyone, is called Founders Podcast. And basically, this guy, David Senra, every week he reads a biography of a famous business founder. So it could be like Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, or Steve Jobs, or even other people like Napoleon. And he summarizes his lessons from the book. And each episode's like 40, 50 minutes, maybe an hour. And like, minute per minute, I think I've learned more from this podcast than anything I've read.
Wow.
And I've read at this point, like, since high school, almost 1,000 books. But this podcast, minute for minute, man, like, the insight is crazy. And I think to myself, how different would my life have been if at 14 I were listening to an hour about the lessons David Senra learned from Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett or any of these people, you know, titans in sort of wisdom, but also financial thinking. And today you can do that, right? Like, kids today have access. All of us have access. And it's just about attention. I used to teach the concept of attention. It's sort of like two words. And if you go back, it's like ad tendo. And tendo is like tendere, which is to draw back like a bow. So ad tension is basically the tension that you would feel at a bow when you aim at something. And that's why attention sucks. Because if you've ever pulled back a heavy bow, it's hard, right? And you have to train that. And then after you train it, you have to aim it. And in life, what we aim it at becomes what we get. I used to talk about interest, right? Inter esse, which means to be within. That's how I translate it. Latin is tough because there's multiple meanings, like Hawaiian. Inter esse, so when you're interested in something, you become within it, right? So I say you fix your attention, you have that target, you let it fly. That's what you're interested in, the target. And being interested in something is the path of that arrow to the target. You slowly become it, you embody it, you try to do everything you can to realize that in your being. And when you succeed in that, you get appreciation. What you are interested in appreciates.
Wow.
And we use appreciation to talk about real estate or something of value that gets better the more you put in. But appreciation is also what we feel for the people we love, right? When we're interested in people, we appreciate them more. So I always used to link those things, right? It's like, in life, you have your attention, you aim it. It takes effort. You get better at it the more you do it. You shoot that attention at what you're interested in. You try to live it. You try to become it. And then at the end of that, that's where all the appreciation in life, the growth, the financial gain, the deepening of a relationship comes from.
Gratification.
And the problem is, with social media, with everything, is our attention is diverted.
Yeah.
And so the question is just, where do we want to fix that attention? What is most important to us? And those are the decisions that we're making every day. For me, honestly, I fell off the wagon for a few months. Like, I typically try to wake up early and start my day praying, reading the Bible, and journaling a little bit. Kind of, that's my sacred place with God, is that quiet time in the morning before the kids wake up, right? And for a few months towards the end of last year, I just totally fell off. I was sleeping until like 8 or 9, and I wasn't reading the Bible every day. And I can see a direct correlation between that and like the quality of what happens in my home with my family. And I think it's because my attention is on the wrong things, right? Like, I'm not paying attention to God and my relationship with him. I'm paying attention to podcasts or to audiobooks or to other stuff. And prioritizing that attention for me is like that foundation. And the walk I'm on now, right, is like, how do I deepen that relationship, right? I'm trying to fix my attention on God. I'm trying to be interested. I'm trying to appreciate. I'm trying to be grateful. I'm trying to deepen that. And I think that's where a lot of, for me at least, that's where the rewards have come from, right? Both in the personal realm, like how I feel, but in my family, how our home feels. And then when I show up in the world, like, I'm better today because I prayed this morning. I'll be honest, like, if I hadn't prayed this morning, this interview probably would suck. And then maybe there's no episode 4, right? But I thought, like, I got to show up, right? You know, it's 6 p.m. on a Friday when we're recording this. Maybe it's 7 p.m. now. I don't know.
I think it's 7:30.
The time has flown, right?
It has.
It's been a long week, but you have to show up,
Yeah.
right? Like, how are you going to show up in that moment? You guys have been working all week, right? Yasu's behind the camera. He's been working all week. Everybody shows up and you're locked in and you just get it done. And we all need something that helps us with that, you know, whether it's faith, family, friends who encourage us. But that requires attention. You know, the other thing that's helped me is I try to fix my attention on my friends and mentors. I've been blessed with men who are, you know, older, wiser. They've had a longer walk with the Lord. They've also had their families for longer than I have. And I try as best I can, especially now that I'm back on the wagon, to get with them, right? It's like, we don't have an excuse in the age of FaceTime to not talk to the people we want to talk to.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you have a friend and you value what they add to your life, we don't have an excuse for not picking up and calling them.
True.
Anybody can answer. You can schedule a Zoom, right? We have calendars. We can schedule things out in the future. We could go for coffee. We could go for lunch. We could go for Pauhana drinks. And that's important. And that's the stuff I think that when we get lost in policy debates about affordable housing, it's the stuff that gets missed, right? Because a policy discussion is always very technical. It's usually not emotional. It doesn't bring in this felt part of people's lives. And so most people, when they hear people talk about policy, are like, that's something other people do. But again, if we go back, policy debates used to be heated. You read the founding fathers writing letters to each other, and man, they're going at each other's throats. So politics doesn't have to be this pretty play nice, right? Obviously, you know, rhetoric can go too far.
Yeah.
We can say things we regret, but it's better, I think, when we show up, right? Even if we're frustrated, even if we're angry, and especially when we can show up in person and really try to sit down with other people.
I'll take an authentic, whatever's authentic. Political speak dies, I'm good forever. Just get it cracking. Let's get to it. You know? So,
well, that's the long form podcast, right? Which sort of we're in is, I think, the death of political speech because the problem was, and look, I'm good at this, right? I have it on good authority that at like Hawaii News Now, there's a few people who call me Soundbite Sterling.
okay.
And they call me that because when they call me for a story, they know that if they do a 2-minute interview for me, they're going to find that 10-second nugget that they can slip into that story for the 6 o'clock news. And there's nothing wrong. That's their job, right? And I know that that's their job.
That's why you're here.
And I try to communicate that in the way that they can use because I want the message to get out. I taught public speaking for 5 years, and I would tell my students, if you have a cause that you care enough about, right, that you really want it to succeed in the world, you owe it to yourself to be the best communicator of that.
I want to ask you that. When did you realize you have the words?
On my 19th birthday, April 1st, 2010, I attended a poetry slam, and I had been doing poetry.
Is this swing?
This was no, it's before that. So I'd started doing poetry in September of 2009, my first month of undergrad at Honolulu Community College. I went to a writing workshop. I sat next to a bunch of kids, and we did our exercises, we wrote, and then we shared our poems. I shared my 16-bar verse. I was a rapper at the time. I thought, man, I'm so cool. And then these two kids, Itai Wong and Alaka'i Kotries, read their poems. And their poems were so good. I was like, oh shit, like I need to crawl in a hole and die. Now, I didn't know it, but Itai and Alaka'i had just got back from winning back-to-back international world champion titles at the Brave New Voices International Poetry Slam. I just thought they were really good. I didn't know that they were literally the best in the world. And I said, whatever they're on, I gotta have it. And so I went to all these writing workshops. I started writing. I write. Next year comes, so I'm only doing this a few months. I was working at 16. For me, it was Wahoo's Fish Tacos, washing dishes.
Oh my gosh.
And there was only one dishwasher at Wahoo's Fish Tacos. So I actually quit that job because I asked the manager to get Thursday night off so I could go to the poetry slam. And he's like, no, man, we need you to wash the dishes. And I was like, find somebody else to wash the dishes. And he's like, no, man. I was like, dude, I'm out. Like, I'm feel fired up about this. So I quit the job. February comes around. I go to the poetry slam. I win the poetry slam. Now I'm qualified for the Grand Slam finals. So it just so happens that the Grand Slam finals in 2010 was on April 1st, the first Thursday of April, which happens to be my birthday. My 19th birthday. I show up to the poetry slam. I read a poem about the mangroves, which is about
Seed.
actually, I think I read poems about homelessness. I read a poem about being sort of haole in Hawaii. And then the last round, I actually didn't have a poem memorized because I was kind of still new to poetry at that point. I have my notebook and I read a poem about my sort of complicated relationship with my father, which later on I would write another poem called Swing, and that's on YouTube.
Okay.
But it was a very primitive version. It was a very raw version. And essentially, I'm 19, I'm grappling with emotions. There are literally like 500 people at Fresh Cafe in Kaka'ako, and I read this poem, and I win the poetry slam. And they say, you're the Grand Slam champion. I get to travel to the National Poetry Slam with a team. And it was the first time in my adult life that I was like good at something, and that people were like, whoa, you're really good at this. And I was like, this feels good. This feels right. And then as I started to teach because I got too old for the teen program because I was 19. So once I was 20, it was like, you got to do something. So I was like, can I like help teach the writing workshop or organize the events? And they were like, sure, I organize the events. I do that. And I'm practicing and I'm doing poetry and I'm involved and I'm teaching it. And it felt good, not only because I had a voice, but I would organize these open mics and these poetry slams. And you'd see these high school students sharing stories that they'd never shared with anyone. I mean, some dark stuff, right? Like childhood abuse, right? Like really tragic stories, but also stories of hope and triumph. And then like 500 people like going nuts and being like, cheering them on, encouraging them. And that was really powerful. I love that. Along the way, I got hired to coach debate at Punahou, which I sort of felt conflicted about because I'm a Roosevelt grad.
Yeah.
I didn't have any debate experience when they hired me. They were just like, you're really good at public speaking. Maybe you should coach debate. So I'm coaching debate at Punahou, and the UH debate coach says, hey, do you want to join the debate team? I was like, I probably should because I'm teaching debate. If I'm teaching debate, but I'm not doing it, that seems sort of dumb. I do it for UH for a couple of years, and I did bad. Like, I was not good. At all the tournaments we went to like 3 tournaments on the mainland, my team ranked in the bottom half of teams.
Wow.
So when I say like below average, like I was below average junior, senior year. I go away to Harvard for my master's in education, and while I'm at Harvard, I end up getting pulled into the Harvard debate team because they just needed a debater. Like somebody got sick and they needed somebody to debate at a tournament. They were like, oh, you did debate, right? You want to jump in? I do like pretty good at that tournament. So I'm like, oh, I'll go to a couple more tournaments. I do pretty good. I'm like, maybe I'm like okay at this, right? So my good friend Daniel Hugo, still one of my best friends, one of the smartest, wisest people I know, was a student at UH at the law school. And I was like, when I come back to Hawaii to teach performing arts, I want to debate with him. So I enrolled in a PhD program in education at UH. And suddenly we're traveling around the world debating. We went to Canada, we went to Yale, we went to Greece for the World Championships. We did not do as good as we thought we would. I think part of that was Daniel was in law school, so he was really busy. So he gets too busy with law school. He's in 2L. And I start debating with this young woman, Geraldine Duff, who was a junior at the time. And we just start crushing. And I'm in a different position from most debaters in Hawaii at that point because I have a job and I'm earning money. Most debate teams from Hawaii at the university could go to like 1 or 2 tournaments a year because that's all the money, right? Like a normal school on the mainland can drive to a college next door to them and have some debate rounds. we have to get on a plane and fly to California or beyond.
Right.
So most teams could go to 2 tournaments a year, but Geraldine had a job too. She was working. We could pay to go to like 5 or 6 tournaments a year. So we did. We went to Jamaica. We went to Canada. We went all around the Netherlands for the World Championship. And we crushed a lot of tournaments and had a lot of success. And then HPU called me and asked to teach. The Hawaii Pacific University, after 2 years of my debating, said, do you want to coach debate and teach public speaking? And I said, sure. And so I spent 5 years in that classroom teaching it. And so I try to practice it, the communication, but really, I think the way I'm able to communicate is because I've taught it. I've spent now like 15 years teaching people public speaking. I've read dozens of books, maybe like 50 books about public speaking.
Wow.
I love communication. I think it's critical. I think our school system does a criminal job in not teaching it. And people suffer as a result. I always say, sorry, I know we're going long, but there's a metaphor I use of, imagine like the shogunate time in Japan, and the shogun calls ninjas. This is not historically accurate. This is a metaphor. He calls all the ninjas to his castle and asks them to demonstrate their number one ninja skill, right? And so like one of them is like throwing ninja stars at the target, and another one's like kicking stuff. And the last one comes in and he takes off his belt and he sort of lays it out from like the end of that table to there. And he stretches it out on the floor, and then he walks across, sort of stepping, right? It's on the floor. And the shogun is like insulted, outraged. He's like, what are you doing, right? Like, I asked you to come and show me your best ninja skill. How dare you? And the guy goes, oh, I'm sorry. You don't understand. I can do that at any height, right? And I think about communication the same way. What we call public speaking is I'm standing in front of an audience. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 100, maybe it's 1,000 people. But what we're doing right now is the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think a lot of times for my students, they think it's different, But I would tell them, like, look, if you've had a conversation, and I look them in the eye while I'm doing this, so I know that they could do a conversation, I'd be like, you could speak to any audience of any size. As if you can talk to one person, you can talk to 1,000 person, because you're not talking to 1,000 people. You're actually talking to one person 1,000 times. You're having an individual conversation with every single person you're talking to. And, I obviously, that's a fun lesson to teach, because you sort of see their eyes kind of explode,
cool.
and their minds kind of like, whoa. And that they're going to go tell that story about the belt thing. That for me helped me, because it allows me, no matter the situation, right? Whether I'm talking to a county council or I'm presenting to an audience of 50 realtors or having this conversation here, I'm not afraid, because I've done this before. And by done this, I mean like I've had a good conversation with one person, right? If you can have a good conversation with one person, I think you can speak to a larger audience. But it requires, I think, the attention, right? Like a lot of times rookie public speakers, right? They don't want to look people in the eyes. They're like sort of sketched out about that. I always tell them, and we would do an exercise where I make them look people in the eyes, and I'm like, did it kill you? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, then do it, right? Do it when you speak, because you're always talking to one person. That attention and the connection that we have when we communicate, right? Conversation or public speech in the ideal form, I think that's what people crave, especially in a world of distraction and inattention, right? To feel truly listened to, right? To feel that someone is truly present, even if it's for 1 minute, is huge, right? Like if I go to my son tonight when I go home and I say, hey, I love you, and I give him a hug, that's huge, right? If I go in and I ignore him, that's not. And I'll be honest, there are days when I'm frustrated and I'm not my best, right? I don't show up in that moment. So I think about that for communication, right? I don't know that I know I'm decent at public speaking, and I know I can teach it because I've taught people to become champions. I coached poets to championships to win all kinds of stuff on the national stage. I coach debaters to win tournaments. I've coached politicians when they're on their campaigns, right? And I just try to focus on breaking down the communication to the simplest thing, which is you're just talking to one person. And if there's any skill I have, it's because I really train my attention. Yeah. I think it comes from reading books. You know, I read a lot of books, but also when I get coffee with somebody or get lunch with somebody or just have a business meeting, I just try to pay attention. Yeah. And that's hard, right? Like at first it's pulling back the bow, and I don't think I was that good at it 15 years ago, right? You're there with somebody and they're speaking, but you're not listening. You're thinking about what you're going to say, right? I just keep pulling back the bow. And now if I sit down with somebody for an hour, I can be present and I can be with them and I can give them attention and be interested in what they have to say and appreciate them. And that, for me, that's where all the rewards are, right? Like with my wife, that's where the rewards come from. It's not loving her as an abstract thing. It's being there with her and understanding what she cares about, what she's upset about, you know, how her frustrations. So long answer to a short question.
No, it's great. As you're talking, I'm sitting here applying it to myself as somebody who's, you know, I have a huge appreciation for words, those who can communicate, you know, one-to-one with the thought in their head, and it comes out exactly, you know, that's why Mila, to me, is it's a superpower, what she's able to do. And that's been through our dynamic, a struggle with us as me being on video at all. I love a conversation. It's one of my favorite things to do. I can oddly do public speaking, but it's these stupid things here that I'm like, this is...
Where's the attention?
This sucks.
Yeah. So I can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt, but I bet you like listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, I think that there's I can't recall the title of it. There's a great book about, I think it's called How to Speak, How to Listen, or How to Listen, How to Speak. Somebody find it and put it in the comments. There's a base, just like Mnemosyne, memory is the mother of creativity, right? So you can't do something new without the old. I think the problem a lot of people have is it's difficult to speak if you don't first listen, right? When I was trying to become a champion slam poet, I listened to hundreds of hours of other poets. Every poetry slam I'd listen to all the poets, and then I'd go home and watch YouTube videos, and I'd just go to school on folks. When I was trying to do debate, I would watch the same debaters who I thought were excellent over and over again and just try to model what they were doing, the cadence. And it's kind of eerie because if you watch debate videos of me, you can see me approaching the cadence of a very famous debater who I love named Bo Seo. Anyway, you model that behavior, you want to recreate it in your own performance. And so I think actually a lot of times I find introverts become the best public speakers because they actually know what to say because they've listened to other people. Yeah. Whereas extroverts oftentimes early on, they're better, but they sort of fizzle out at a certain point because they're not willing, when someone else is speaking, to really hone in and listen.
You lose some of the depth.
Right. Yeah. And that's where interesting coaching debate, right? You would think, oh, the extroverted people, those are going to be the real killers. It was the introverts who always sort of rose up in the end.
That's funny. I think I root a lot of my insecurity in putting people who are so good at that on pedestals. To me, that's the bar. Yeah. And I know the distance between it. And I'm like, why should I even?
Well, so again, right? This is my
superpower in a group chat. I'm on your ass, like in text.
Oh, totally.
My words are 3 seconds behind what's in my head. Sure. So that pause on a text, I'm like top class.
He's like, zing.
Yeah, you can think it through again.
Different. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, though, right? Like there's the danger of people that talk pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is it's shit, right?
Totally.
Like, and that's where, the other part of when I would teach public speaking is I'm like, one, like you should be good at saying things, but two, you should have something to say. But even before that, right? Like sort of what you say, how you say it. The Greeks really thought about, sort of this idea of ethos or ethos. People pronounce it different ways, which was who you are, right? Like your credibility. But we use the word credibility to translate it in public speaking classes. Not exactly right. It's way bigger than that, right? It was everything, like your relationships, your family history, who you are, all of this context stuff, right? In a lot of cultures, you introduce yourself with where you're from, your family, your descent, all of that. Part of that is because we want to know who someone is, right? Not just what you have to say and can you talk pretty, but who you are. And I think one of the issues, there are lots, but one of the issues we have is we do valorize the people that talk pretty, right? But we don't know who they are. And that's the real danger. When we lived in the real world all the time, we sort of knew who people were. You know what I mean? Like you could be like, yeah, he's good at talking, but he's a scoundrel. And likewise, you could know, oh, this person's really quiet. They don't talk much, but they are a saint, right? And social media, the unfortunate thing about it is it's sort of the opposite, right? You have no idea who someone is. And the kinds of things that make someone really good don't make for good content. You know what I mean? Like you could stage things and put that there, but all the little things, like does someone hold the door open for nobody posts a video of them holding the door open, so you don't know if they do that. You don't know if they're like the 10% tipper or the no percent tipper.
Nobility isn't viral.
Virtue isn't viral.
Virtue isn't viral.
Nobility isn't viral. That's all in the real world. And it requires us to really watch people and observe them. But more than that, I think it's more important for us to watch ourselves, right? Does my resume look good? Hell yeah. And I worked hard on it. Does it matter? Right? Like, let's assume I'm being a terrible husband to my wife. I'm being a terrible father to my children, but my LinkedIn looks amazing. Am I good? Right? I got 99 recommendations for public speaking on my LinkedIn. I'm a champion. But I'm neglecting my mom, right? Or I'm neglecting my family when they call me. Is that good? And the danger, right, for folks on social media is you get validation for things that aren't real, right? Like the real thing is I had a shitty day at work and I come home, I still need to hug my children, right? I feel like shit, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's the hard thing. I'm not going to post an Instagram video of that moment, right? And I'm also not going to post an Instagram moment of the nights I didn't do it, right? Because I'd feel too embarrassed to admit to that. And I hope that we can get away from that mask of social media and more toward who people really are. And that requires these kinds of conversations, right? I always would tell people, like, you have to just have more conversations. And it's really easy, right? Like you just pick a person who's like on your friends list and be like, hey, do you want to get coffee sometime? I have never had anyone say no. You won't believe me when I say this. Every person I have ever asked to get breakfast, lunch, or coffee has said yes.
That's
in my
true.
whole life. Now, admittedly, I'm not doing this in like a creepy datey way, right? Like, so I understand, obviously, if there's romantic stuff, people will say no. But if your only intention is, I want to get to know you better, people will always say yes.
Right.
And young people, I think, struggle with that, especially if they were raised on social media and COVID made that really hard. But it's a muscle that you practice by doing. And I try to do that, right? Like I'm trying to get coffee and lunch and breakfast with people. When people reach out to me, there are occasions where I say I'm too busy. But most of the time I'm like, I'd love to chop it up and get to know somebody and really, kind of understand who they are and what their life is like. The choice in life is like, is it better to do that or scroll for an hour?
Yeah.
And I'm as guilty as anyone. I scroll sometimes. I watch too much YouTube. I listen to too many podcasts and audiobooks when I could be spending time with my friends and family. But at my best, on my best day, that's what I'm doing, right? I'm trying to be with somebody, be present, form a relationship, invest in a relationship. I just hit up one of my friends, Noah, if you're out there, we're getting breakfast. I was praying the other day, and my friend Noah just comes into my mind, right? And so there's a question in that moment, like, what do you do? Right? This person pops into your mind. What do you do? And I was like, my best self texts him, right? And says, hey man, like, was just praying, thought of you, would love to get together for breakfast sometime. I know you're busy. He's a doctor, right? He's working really hard. And then he doesn't text me until the next day because I'm guessing he was sleeping in after a shift, right? He texts me at 9 a.m. He goes, oh man, this was the best thing to wake up to, man. We got to get breakfast.
That's
Let's
cool.
link up, right? In that moment, I have a choice. Like, I'm thinking about my brother Noah. Do I text him? I don't always send the text. I wish I did. But the other day I did, right? And if I get the chance tomorrow, I think of somebody, try to send the text, make the call.
Thank you for saying yes to us.
Oh, that's why I answered.
I'm
So,
so grateful.
this is TMI, right? But it was like, we could either do it this week or we could do it next week. And I was, my wife was like, hey, you've been doing a lot this week. Are you sure you really want to do this as an extra thing on the Friday? And I was like, no, you know what? Like Yasu's like, it'd be better to do it this week. And I thought to myself, I looked at my calendar. Sorry, Yasu, I'm outing you. I looked at my calendar and I said, no, I can do it.
Oh my gosh.
I'm making an excuse, right? I'm saying, I'll push this off a week from now.
That's what I was hoping for, but not anymore. I'm happy with you. I'm happy.
Well, you had to
Yeah.
scramble.
They know that they got to force me, but I'm glad.
But
I'm
now
glad
you
we
make me
did
feel
it.
confident that I can, like, the next person I
Yeah.
ask is gonna say yes because no one says no.
Oh, you gotta believe it. I think you have to believe that people are gonna say yes, right?
Totally.
Like if you have the mental picture that people are gonna say no, then you never do it,
Yes.
right? Like you have to, there's a leap of faith,
Yeah.
right? And I think in all human relationships, whether that's dating or a business relationship or just reaching out to somebody for a podcast, there's a leap of faith in that moment when you ask like, hey, do you want to connect? And you're like,
Yeah.
in my experience, as long as you're not creepy and weird,
Yeah.
the answer is yes. Now, if you're creepy and weird, like stop being creepy and weird.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised. People will want to connect with you.
Yeah.
Like the thing that's stopping them from connecting you is usually that you're creepy or weird. You were not creepy.
Thank you.
You were not weird.
God.
So when you reached out, I said, yeah. And
Was
this has
Yasu
been-
weird?
No, Yasu was awesome.
Awesome.
This has been really fun.
Thank you.
So, I genuinely thank you. This was really fun. I enjoyed the conversation. I think what you're doing is great. I wish you much success with guests. If there are guests that I know that you can't get a hold of, like let me know and I'll just call them and be like, hey,
Yes.
it's good
Yeah.
because you need to do more of this. And people, I think, need to see this more, right? Like they need to see people just connecting. And I have to say, right, like not all podcasts do this equally.
Yes.
Not all shows do this equally, but this was fun.
Good.
Thank you.
That's gives hope. For
It
sure.
does.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Imua.
I think I may show up for a third episode now.
We're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll pick your brain after we're done about who to bring on next. Thanks, Sterling.
Yeah, big pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.